Okay, we are going to do our second lecture for the Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper certification. And this topic today will be about sustainable landscaping, which is a gigantic topic. And in particular, Quell has us focus on the aspects that are related to water conservation and irrigation technology. Sustainable landscaping is a near and dear topic to me. It is kind of what got me into this whole thing in the very beginning when I first was learning to garden and learning that horticulture could be a profession. It was very much aligned with sustainable agriculture and kind of the urban sustainability movement. And I've learned a lot since first getting involved. And I think what Quell is presenting here is really innovative. It's interesting that a program on water efficient landscaping would even have a section covering sustainability. But it's such a broad topic that it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And if you've taken any of my classes that are focused on sustainability, you probably will know most of what I have to say. So I'm going to stick to the script here, and I'll try to kind of zoom past some things that may or may not be needing our attention. And anything that I find particularly interesting, I'll pull out in greater detail. And so here we go with sustainable landscaping. This artwork that Quell has is pretty nice. And here it's kind of showing their model of a sustainable landscape. And it's raining in San Diego. So to have sustainability, rain is a good thing. And more importantly, they're harvesting the rain off of the roof, storing it in tanks, and then the overflow is going into a basin, which can be called a rain garden. On a big scale, it's called a bioswale when you're talking landscaping. And the whole point is to hang on to as much rainwater as possible. You want to store it in tanks. You want to sink it in the soil. You want to slow it down on its path to the ocean because that's where it's going to go. And then you want to spread it out. So there's the phrase, slow it, spread it, sink it. And a lot of people think about that when they talk about rainwater harvesting in the urban environment. Let's see what else Quell has to say about sustainable landscaping. The objectives: become familiar with the concept of sustainable landscaping, understand the reasons why we should adopt sustainable landscape practices, and then understand what are those key landscape practices that are sustainable. There's a really good resource out there if you have a chance to participate in the Water Smart Landscape Makeover series. There's a book written just for San Diego. Our program is loosely affiliated with that program, and we support it in many ways. And basically, it's just a generalized approach for homeowners on how they can have an efficient, sustainable landscape. So if we go with Quell's definition here, sustainable landscaping is an approach to the design, construction, and maintenance of landscapes that encompasses ecologically sound practices. And their biggest set of advice is to look at your landscape like a mini watershed. And in that regard, think of it as something that can retain and clean stormwater, can conserve resources, and provide a healthy habitat. So the idea of this mini watershed, it's with the watershed concept, you're thinking about how we're all connected, and where the rainfall goes, in one area, it will always flow to the same point. And so if you're thinking about your landscape as a watershed, what you're trying to do, it's not that you want all the water to exit at one point, the goal is that you should be trying to move and control where water goes on your property before it escapes. I kind of think of it like hacky sack. You want to keep it up. You don't want it to hit the ground. And so it's the same with rainwater. You don't want it to go over your property line. You want to hang on to it as long as possible. And don't worry about stealing it, because even if you hang on to it all year long, eventually when you water your plants, you're giving it back to nature. So you're not doing anything illegal. But obviously, sustainability can incorporate many more things. Here, they're talking about ecologically sound practices, the idea that we want to do no harm to the environment. And in particular, that watershed concept can be applied to your landscape in some unique ways. Sustainability involves a whole systems approach, which basically just means everything's connected to everything else. So you can't really talk about sustainability without considering all these other elements of our culture and of the environment. And that includes finances, economics, as well as social issues and taking care of people. But mainly, when we think of the environment, we think of all these different things like soils and habitat and water conservation and choosing the proper plant in the right place at the right time. So all of those things need to go together. And that's why we talk about sustainability when it comes to talking about efficient landscaping. There's no point being very efficient in your irrigation if you're watering something that's going to be an invasive species or something that's going to be not climate appropriate. So the idea is we want all of these things to kind of be considered at the same time. So why should we study sustainable landscaping? Well, Quell chooses to give you the most boring answers first. First, it's the law. So we should be sustainable because it's the law. In California, we have the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance, or MWELO, and that is the law for all new landscapes being installed. They have to be water efficient. And then Quell is telling us it's a good opportunity to generate revenue because we can convert the old landscapes, and there's new jobs out there for being a water manager, which is what you're learning how to do in this class. And maintenance requires a little bit of higher skill in how to prune their shrubs as opposed to just the mow, blow, and go of the traditional landscape. And the next reason to care about sustainability is that it looks good. So it's an aesthetic and a functional upgrade. You won't have as much puddles after the rain. You'll be absorbing all that stuff, and it looks nice. So why should we be sustainable, like for our future generations or for the continuation of our way of life on this planet, or so that civilization does not collapse? Because those are all very real things. But interestingly, I guess if you're trying to talk to someone who doesn't already care, you can talk about the legal, the economic, and the ornamental aspects of sustainability. If you want to look at saving water, time, and money, you can compare the traditional landscape to what they're calling a sustainable landscape, which the sustainable landscape would be primarily composed of native plants and would not have lawn and would require some different maintenance. So if you look at the traditional landscape, there's an estimate based on apparently 15-year-old numbers that in a year's time, your traditional landscape of some shrubs and a lawn is going to cost 57,000 gallons per year, produce 670 pounds of yard waste, and require 80 maintenance hours. And then you compare that to the sustainable landscape, it's going to only take 6,000 gallons of water, produce 250 pounds of waste, and require only 15 hours of maintenance per year. And that sounds nice, only 15 hours of maintenance per year, but it's not 1 week where you work 5 hours, 3 days a week. It's different amounts of maintenance required throughout the year. Different types of work is required. The reason the traditional landscape is so easy is that every week you show up, you mow the lawn, and you water it, and it's going to be guaranteed, as long as there's no catastrophes, it's going to be guaranteed to work. And the sustainable landscape is going to change throughout the seasons. It's going to have a lot of trees and shrubs and boulders and mulch and exposed soil and all kinds of different things, sun and shade, a lot more complexity. And you kind of need to know more. You need to know what you're doing. You need to know the different species and how their life cycle works. And so one thing that's not here is the knowledge hours, and maybe the sustainable landscape requires greater knowledge hours. But there you go. And it's trying to generate the the business case for sustainability. Why else is sustainability important? Well, we want to have living soil because life in the soil, organic matter, and compost will help to hold more water, and it will help to grow healthier plants. And if we do the climate appropriate plants, then they're more likely to thrive with less irrigation. And then we have less pollution, cleaner waterways and oceans, and we can recharge the groundwater. And maybe you could produce some food and shelter for yourself or for wildlife, and ultimately reduce energy consumption and clean the air. So if traditional landscaping's got some pretty nasty habits, the use of fossil fuels is inherently not sustainable. If you use plastic, it's inherently not sustainable. We're not regenerating any of that stuff. So therefore, it's not sustainable, cannot be continued into the future. And if we're looking long term, we have to think about what are behaviors that we can do today that will make it possible for our ancestors who will inherit the things we leave behind. What can we do today to make it possible for them to have a good quality of life? So here are some key sustainable landscaping practices. There's a nice little wheel here that shows you some different colors of categories. We want to landscape locally, take care of healthy living soil, the right plant at the right place at the right time. We want to conserve water, protect air quality, and conserve energy, and create and protect wildlife habitat. So that's all nice sounding stuff. How do you do all of them at the same time? First of all, they recommend thinking of your landscape as a mini watershed. And the image on the right-hand side is showing the traditional landscape, which ignores rain largely and potentially treats rain as a hazard and tries to get rid of the rain as quick as possible. You're looking at drainage, you're looking at slopes, and you're trying to direct that water to the storm drain. Instead, a sustainable landscape will assess the site and look at the soil type, the topography, meaning any kind of slope. And then you want to look at what is existing for your plants and then identify any microclimates. And the microclimate is like the sunny side of the house is the hotter side of the house. The shady side of the house is obviously cooler and will hold moisture better. So you put plants in the appropriate place for the microclimate. It's important to understand how water flows. On a rainy day, that is your cue to go outside and put on the raincoat or take the umbrella. And I like to bring a piece of paper and draw. So I literally have a map of the property and I put arrows. Where is the water flowing? And where are the puddles collecting? And each of those puddles can be something where you either put plants to benefit from that water, or you can contour the ground and shape it a little bit to alleviate the puddle. But you ultimately want the water to go into the soil as fast as possible. Your roof would be like the mountaintops, and there's no infiltration in the mountaintops or on your roof. You get 100% runoff. And then water will travel downhill directly at a right angle to the contour line. So Water always flows directly downhill, and you want it to permeate into soil, basically. So in your driveways and your sidewalks that are made of cement, you're not going to get any infiltration. The goal is infiltrate water into the soil. You can use gray water as a valuable type of water recycling. So that's anything that comes from your house, your shower, your washing machine, or your bathroom sink can all be recycled safely as gray water. The toilet or the kitchen sink are technically not safe for gray water if we're looking at it from a legal standpoint. And then you look at your soil type and the structure of your soil. So are you on clay or sand? And then how is that clay and sand arranged? Do you have compaction, or do you have a good aggregate that is going to be receptive of the rainwater? You need to understand your existing plants as well as the local plant communities. So you need to know what a native plant is and which native plants are good in the landscape. And you need to know which ones are water wasters and which ones to keep, and what are invasive species and what to certainly remove. And so native plants are good because they provide a sense of place, and they're a starting point for selecting plants in the landscape, and they can help you determine how much water is needed. Native plants are great because they need no water. They're native to this place, so you don't need to water them. If you want them to look a little bit nicer than nature, which is usually what you want in a garden, then you need to water them at least once every 2 weeks in the summertime. But if you didn't have that ability, you didn't have that luxury, then native plants will survive just fine with no additional rainwater. With no additional irrigation water. And that's the definition kind of the native plant. It's climate appropriate. We want to have living things in the soils. And so in addition to the minerals, air, and water, we need organic matter and compost and plants, mulch. All of that helps to build a healthy living soil. And we need as much life as possible. There's no such thing as a bad bug in the soil. We want everything, because as you have more and more different species and different conditions, you'll have greater diversity, and greater diversity creates more resilience in how those little things interact with each other. And the more life, the better. So how do we build organic matter? Well, we can have plant and animal debris in various stages of decay, which will attract the living organisms, and that will improve soil health, water retention, and potentially carbon sequestration, although that's a hard thing to measure. And then we won't need to put stuff out on the green bin. We can recycle all of our organic matter. When we do so, we don't need to fertilize as much. And it can really help as an amendment to degraded, compacted urban soils that haven't been cared for. And we want to hang on to all the leaves as they fall off the trees, and any grass clippings or any shrubs, hang on to those and keep them on site if possible. One way to think about it is all that plant material took minerals from your soil. And so if you export that plant material, you are exporting minerals from the soil. So you want to recycle those minerals, turn them back into humus, the byproduct of living things in the soil, finished compost, and you put it back in the soil, and now you've put it back where it came from. That's the point. And then you want to avoid tilling to protect the soil structure. The more you dig and break up all the soil, the more you're going to start back at the beginning. Life will move in and do just fine, but you want to avoid tilling unless you're in an annual vegetable garden bed or in an annual flower bed. Both of those are perfectly fine additions to a landscape. And minimal tilling is going to be needed if you have really compacted soil. But like if you're going to do agriculture, they say do no till, which means don't get the rototiller and don't drive a tractor all over your field. In an ornamental landscape or an urban landscape, that's not always as relevant. A lot of people think no till means don't put a shovel in your soil. That's not necessarily the case. You want to mulch. Mulch is a good thing. You always want mulch unless you are providing habitat for certain insects, lizards and bugs and solitary bees, things that like to kind of burrow in exposed soil. But for the most part, you want mulch. You want at least a 4-inch layer. Anything less than 4 inches doesn't do a whole lot of good. So I would recommend a 4 to 6 inch layer actually of mulch. It does a bunch of things. It helps to reduce evaporation and keeps the temperature of the soil more moderate. And you'll still get weeds to pop up in the mulch, but the difference is that the weeds become very easy to pull. And so you don't necessarily have difficulty removing the weeds from a mulch layer. What is mulch? Mulch is anything that covers the ground. So it could be wood chips, it could be like the leaves and the branches that are chipped up after a tree trimmer came through, or it could also be rocks or plastic or shredded rubber tires. There's all kinds of things that can act as a mulch. It's anything you put on the surface of the soil. I only really recommend organic mulches, meaning it had to have once been alive. Plastic mulch, rubber tires, and even gravel don't really work too well in San Diego. We're not actually in the desert. And so if you go to the desert, you can see a lot of gravel in the soil and there's gaps between all of the plants. But here on the coast, that's not the natural condition. So if you put gravel, you're going to be always needing to pull the weeds that grow up through the gravel. And the weed fabric that you put down is a bad idea because it breaks down after 2 years. Why do they keep putting it in? Because the people who design it and the people who build it are long gone after 2 years, and they want it to look good just long enough. So never put in the weed fabric. It's a bad idea. And here it's saying the mulch is an effective alternative to landscape fabric. That is somewhat true. You want to reduce or eliminate your pesticides and herbicides. A lot of times, if you just do nothing, that's the best way to handle a pest problem because that'll allow the predator of the pest to come on in. And there's a certain amount of damage that you should accept as okay. But if things become very problematic, you want to follow an integrated pest management approach. That means you want to only act when necessary, and when it's necessary, you want to do the least harm. So you want to find other methods for dealing with pests. For instance, can you plant different plants that won't attract the pests? Can you have a sacrificial plant that attracts your pests away? Can you, if you're going to try to control, or in other words, kill, can you first prevent them from entering? Is there a way to, depending on what it is there a way to not attract them in the first place? And then if you've got to do something about the ones you've got, are there less harmful methods? And can you do a mechanical or like a physical? Can you just go and wipe them off, whatever they're on? Or can you trap whatever you're trying to trap in a physical way? And if that doesn't work, then you say, okay, I may need a chemical. And if you use a chemical, try to find one that is targeted to just that one organism and not going to kill a bunch of other things. Now, that's a very broad generalization. That's not enough info for you to act, but it helps you understand the idea. We want to prevent soil compaction. And so don't drive trucks on your landscape, and watch where you put your landscape pathways and try to keep the pathways consistent, because the more you trample all over your landscape, the more it is going to cause problems. So there's an additional slide here about sheet mulching, and sheet mulching is basically like a super thick layer of mulch. And when you do that, you basically are building like a compost pile on the ground. And they say it's an effective way to get rid of turf or grass. And in particular, it's cool season grass. So if you've got a fescue lawn, you can sheet mulch over the top of it. But if you have a warm season grass, like Bermuda or kikuyu, or any of the grasses that send out stolons that form kind of horizontal nets on the soil, then your sheet mulch won't do the job. And additionally, a lot of people put cardboard as part of the sheet mulch, but in dry climates such as San Diego, you want to watch out for the newspaper and the cardboard. It has a tendency to dry out and can even potentially become kind of hydrophobic, so that the water that does hit your soil won't even go down to the soil level. So if you're going to use cardboard, you have to get it super, super wet and make sure that it stays really wet and never dries out. In other climates, cardboard decomposes very quickly and is a good idea. But you want to watch out in San Diego. And you're always safe to not use cardboard, and it'll work just fine. Then there's a little math formula here, and this is how you determine how much compost and how much mulch to order if you're going to be bringing it in. It's a simple volumetric formula where you're trying to figure out, okay, if you're going to order mulch that can cover 1,000 square feet of area with 3 inches, well, how much mulch are you going to need? We measure soil-based materials in cubic yards typically. And a cubic yard is 3 feet, it's a square, it's a cube, 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. And so a lot of people say, well, how many cubic feet are in a cubic yard? There you go. And a lot of people say, okay, so 333, that's 369. There's 9 cubic feet in a cubic yard, right? No, you're wrong. Because it's volumetric, you have to think in 3 dimensions. And it is 3 times 3 times 3, which equals 27. So you get 9 times 3, 27. There's 27 cubic feet in a cubic yard. And so how do we decide all this? You think, okay, I need 3 inches deep. How much of a cubic foot is that? A cubic foot is 12 inches tall. So I'm going to go 1/4 of a cubic feet. You have 1,000 square feet, and then you want that filled up with 1/4 of a cubic foot on every square foot. We look at the math there, and you take 1,000, you multiply it by 3 divided by 12, because of your 3 inches divided by 12. That'll give you 250 cubic feet. But you cannot order 250 cubic feet of compost or mulch. You have to order it in cubic yards. So you divide 250 by 27, which gives you 9.26 cubic yards, or about 10 cubic yards. What's the most that they can deliver? 20 yards. That's the maximum amount that a truck can safely deliver to you, is 20 yards of any kind of material. 10 yards is 1 truck, 20 yards is 1 truck and 1 trailer. So it's convenient for you to order things in groups of 10, because it's going to cost you the same as if you order 15 or if you order 20. So in this case, the example is 9.26 cubic yards, and you probably want to just order 10 yards. So here's some images showing, the bottom image is showing sheet mulching with cardboard, and notice they are wetting it down with the hose. They are not wetting it enough, so that's going to become a problem. What you need to do in Southern California with cardboard is you need to soak that literally underwater. You need that thing to be saturated and super wet, and then right away you put the wood chips on top. That's the only hope you have of preventing that cardboard from drying out and becoming a problem. So here they're showing you what's the steps to convert a lawn into a sheet mulched garden. Well, they say remove all the sprinkler caps and the sprinkler heads and cap them so they can't turn on. Remove any invasive species, mow the lawn, leave the clippings in place. You want to bevel the edges, which I think they're talking about the edge of the lawn, that top image there, meaning till up the soil a little bit so that you don't have grass all the way to the edge. Lay cardboard wet, you overlap it 6 to 8 inches. You apply 2 to 4 inches of compost and 2 to 4 inches of mulch. And then if you're planting to use soil instead of compost, I would recommend not planting right away. And it's best to wait until the cardboard breaks down. So I would do the top method and wait 6 months. If you do it in the end of summer and then start planting in spring, you'll have a winter season to hopefully have accumulated lots of moisture in the soil, or vice versa. Just wait 6 months and you'll be fine. If we look at right plant, right place at right time, what that's talking about is avoiding plants that can become a problem. So no invasive species. And ideally, you stick with a native plant, something that's from this area because it's perfectly climate adapted. But we can also look to other Mediterranean climates. There's 5 of them throughout the world, and they contain plants that are climate appropriate, meaning they're okay with a dry summer. And if you look in our landscape, many of our common landscape plants are from the Mediterranean climates. So there's a broad plant palette to choose from. The key is to pick one from a Mediterranean climate, meaning literally the Mediterranean Sea area, or South Africa, or Australia, or Chile, or California. Those are your 5 Mediterranean climates. And of those, do not pick any that are going to become invasive. And there are good lists of invasive plants to try to avoid. You want to limit your grass. Turf grass is good for pets and it's good for kids, but you want to keep it limited. And ideally, you put it in a shape that is easy to irrigate. So if it's a round shape, like a weird kind of kidney shape, that's going to be tricky to irrigate and you're going to be wasting a little bit more water. But if you keep your lawn in a square or a rectangle, that's going to be way easier to irrigate. And there are different varieties. You can get drought tolerant varieties, which basically just means it requires less water. None of them are truly drought tolerant. They call them no-mow varieties, which also is not necessarily the thing that it says. You can adjust your maintenance practices and increase your mowing height in order to not need to water as much. There's some good resources out there for helping you maintain a sustainable landscape. And there's an ebook published by Douglas Kent, and it's called California Friendly Maintenance Guide for Landscapers, Gardeners, and Land Managers. You just Google that and you can find the PDF for free. It's a great resource to look up. And if you're going to be a landscape maintenance contractor, that's one that you should have all of your crew read and learn from. There's a list here of some of the standard maintenance practices that are going to be good for a landscape. Here's integrated pest management. As I discussed, it's the idea of using chemicals as a last resort and trying to do everything you can beforehand to prevent and eliminate the pest problem without needing to spray something. And there's a concept called firescaping, which is the idea that in fire-prone areas, we don't want to cause hazards to our house. And so you create defensible space, which is a zone of limited plant height and plant growth so that your house itself is not going to be the next in line. So you prune up your plants, you plant things that are not likely to burn. And even in the backcountry areas or the East County where fires are common, a feature like a pond or a swimming pool, while not typically considered sustainable, would be potentially life-saving. And so you may decide that a water feature is justified in a place where fires are likely to happen because that water feature could either help to put out the fire. Helicopters will even come down and take a drink with their elephant trunk hose to go put out other fires in the area. They'll just come steal your pool water in the event of a true emergency. Or even just some smaller water features can adequately hydrate your landscape so that even if it's not like a pond or a swimming pool, but some small little wet, drippy rocks and things that provide pollinator habitat, those could even help to keep your landscape more hydrated and save you in a fire. So here's a poll. Why should established landscapes be watered just to need? Select all that apply. A, it reduces maintenance. B, there's healthy soil and roots that need oxygen. C, it reduces green waste. And D, it reduces plant stress and disease. There you go. You guessed it. It's all four of them. Now we conserve water as part of sustainable landscaping, looking at the watershed approach. This is an important concept. You're not sustainable if you're not thinking about water in San Diego. And we want to rely as little as possible on imported supplemental water. And therefore, we need to have highly efficient irrigation systems, and we need to manage those systems closely so we don't waste any water. You already went out and looked at your water meter, so you know where the water meter is located, and you have some idea of how you can use it as a tool for managing water. You can use it to detect the leaks and to come up with a flow rate. How many gallons per minute is your landscape irrigation using? And you start with that, and then any improvement you make, you compare it to your baseline gallons per minute. And you want to always be reducing your gallons per minute while still adequately irrigating all of your plants. You can capture rainwater off of the roof, can redirect your water downspouts to soil, like a rain garden or to cisterns. One thing you want to do if you are going to catch some water is be ready for the water to overflow. It will always need to go somewhere. So plan for that overflow and don't be surprised because you cannot compress water. So water is going to go where it goes most easily. And usually that's downhill. So give it a chance to go somewhere else if you're going to catch it in a rain barrel. Gray water is a wonderful thing that all urban homes should be practicing. Basically, you just take the wastewater that would normally go down the drain and into the storm drain, which would go directly to the ocean. You want to put it in your landscape because that is valuable water. Sometimes it's got extra nutrients in it that are helpful for your plants. And it's something that you should hang on to and keep on site. There are some state and local laws that govern whether or not gray water is safe. One thing that you can always do without a permit is redirect the washing machine water. So that's your water. You can put it right out into the soil. A couple of things you want to do to be safe. You want to have the water go into the mulch. Don't have water just sit there. The gray water, if you let it sit for 24 hours, it's going to turn into black water and be really stinky. So that water, you want to get it as quick as possible out into the landscape and interacting with the soil. And you want that soil to be covered with mulch. So you shouldn't really see the gray water. The other thing you should do is have the gray water go to the same plants that your rainwater will go to. And so if you have a gutter that goes to your landscape, you want the fresh water to flush out some of the salty water from your washing machine every now and then. So you can plant all your fruit trees and all of your medium and heavy water use plants with gray water and rainwater supplemental irrigation. So we have a way to calculate for how to know how much rainwater you're going to get. Basically, there's a shortcut, and it's that 1 inch of rain falling on a 1,000 square foot roof will generate approximately 600 gallons of runoff. 600 gallons off of 1,000 square feet with 1 inch of rain. That's a lot of water. That's more water than most people think. A 600-gallon tank is a huge tank. So you need to kind of think about that in order to decide how much water you're going to try to actually hang on to. and what plants you're going to try to water with just your rainwater or your gray water. In order to determine your rain catchment potential, you would find the area of your roof in square feet. It doesn't matter if it's a flat roof or a pitched roof. You literally just look at the square foot, the footprint, because it's going to be the same. And you multiply that by the amount of rainfall in inches. So most people do that per year or per month. In San Diego, downtown San Diego, you're about 10 inches per year, although that's the average. Some years are 20 and some years are 2. Then you multiply it by 0.62, and that's a conversion factor to get you into gallons. If we look at gray water, you've got your clothes washer, your shower and bath, and your bathroom sink. You do not want to include the toilet, the kitchen sink, or the dishwasher. And you don't want to include the clothes washer if you're washing cloth diapers or greasy rags or any other chemicals. So if you are going to divert your washing machine to the landscape, you always want to have the ability to put it down the sewer also. When we protect water and air quality, that's part of the larger watershed and the larger environment. So all of our practices that we do can help to prevent erosion and pollution. So we want to stop all runoff. Runoff happens when rain hits an impervious surface, like a sidewalk, pavement, driveway, rooftop, and then flows down into the storm drain. And when that happens, it picks up dirt and debris, anything that has settled on those surfaces, and carries it directly to the ocean or any other waterway. So if we can eliminate the runoff, we're going to be protecting water quality. And one way to do that is to limit the impervious surfaces in the landscape. Like a classic example would be, instead of a big driveway, just put the little strips for the tires. And then in between the strips, you have grass or some other sort of exposed soil or landscape that can absorb the water. The goal is to have as much porous, soft scape or living plants as possible to soak up your water. Here is the acronym, or I guess here they have the 4 S's. Slow the runoff, store it for the future, spread it out in planters' gardens and other permeable surfaces, and sink it back into the ground. And the image on the right is showing kind of a bioswale where that water is trapped, and then there's some freshwater wetland plants that are absorbing it so that the water does not continue to flow downhill. You can do something small on a residential landscape scale. A swale like this is a type of green infrastructure. It's part of LID, low impact development, and it's something that is managed by the stormwater laws in California, and all new landscapes, including parking lots and sidewalks and all sorts of things, they require these kind of swales, rain gardens, curb cuts, and all the things that allow the rainwater to soak in as opposed to flow down to the storm drain. All of this will help to reduce air pollution, improve air quality, and help in ultimately reducing harmful greenhouse gases. So here's a quick Q&A. How much runoff will 1 inch of rain on a 1,000 square foot roof generate? Is it 1,200? Is it 1,000? Is it 600? Or is it 100 gallons? Here's your formula. You take your area in square feet, you times it by your rainfall in inches, and you times it by 0.62 to convert inches to gallons. There you go, 600. 600 gallons from 1 inch of rain on a 1,000 square foot roof. And the last piece of the sustainability wheel here is to create and protect habitat for wildlife. And so landscapes are essential habitat for wildlife in the urban environment. And in many urban areas, the residential and commercial landscapes are literally the ecosystem that these living things depend on. So there's 4 primary things that living things need out of your landscape, which is food, water, cover, and space. So the food would be things like flowers, pollen, nectar, berries. The water source is going to be some sort of a water feature, and it can be really small. It can even be like a dog food or a dog's water, for instance. Can be a leaky faucet. If you've got one of those hose bibs that are dripping, that's going to become a water source for wildlife. So it's best to try to plan that in. You need cover or like some kind of safety. So a large shrub with lots of branches that lets the whatever living thing you have be able to dart in there to escape. Even like a wood pile could be something like that. And that may or may not be the same place where the living thing wants to spend its time. So you need a place for, like if it's a bird, for instance, you need places for them to nest, as well as places for them to seek safety from predators. All of this can happen with like a diverse landscape. Try to incorporate as many different types of features and ground covers as possible. A lot of different species of plants, a lot of different types of plants, trees, shrubs, ornamental grasses, and herbaceous plants are all going to be really helpful. If you stick to native plants or predominant native plants, you're going to have a lot more local wildlife, and you can get a lot of different visual, aesthetic diversity as well that can be really pleasing. And you're looking in particular for plants that will bloom or fruit at different times of the year. So hopefully every single month you've got something for the wildlife to enjoy in your yard. When it comes to conserving energy, we want to use less energy. So obviously, if we eliminate the lawn, then the lawnmower can go along with it. And then most of our maintenance is going to be done with hand tools, or at least less often with power tools. And anytime we use power tools, we're obviously using the energy that's embedded, whether they're batteries or gasoline. Both of those, if we can avoid the use of them, we're better off. The other thing to consider is that your irrigation water has a lot of energy embedded in it. It took a lot of electricity to pump that irrigation water to the house or to the property. So the less you can rely on irrigation water, the more energy conscious your landscape will be as well. So using less potable water saves energy. In a sustainable landscape, you're looking at natural microclimates. You're utilizing the shade. You can plant a tree to help shade the sunny side of a house. That tree can be one that drops its leaves in the winter if you want to encourage warmth in the cool season and encourage coolth in the warm season. And you can take a look at different maintenance equipment and what is going to generate the least amount of air pollution and noise pollution. And then also when you're looking at your materials for building landscapes, you can try to source them locally, and you can try to reuse materials, recycle materials, look for things that are going to be thrown away, and try to get plants in a stage that are more likely to survive. There's lots of things you can do to try to conserve energy and reduce your waste. So here's the review questions. I'll put them up here really quickly. I won't read through them, each one of them, but you should be able to answer these on your own. Go ahead and pause, answer these questions, make sure you understand. If you don't, you can go back in this video and rewatch. And here's our next set. Make sure that these are questions you feel comfortable answering. You will see them in this class as part of an exam, and you have this lecture to help you study, as well as the manual. There we go. That's the Quell Introduction to Sustainable Landscaping. I hope you found it enjoyable and insightful, and maybe even useful in your daily life or in your job. And it's going to be the foundation for why we do what we do. This concept of sustainability and doing what's right for people and the planet is foundational to the concept of managing our water efficiently and making sure that when we do irrigate our landscape, we do so in a way that does not harm the planet.